Alright, let's talk about the respiratory and the circulatory system. Words that we will discuss are the diaphragm, lungs, alveoli, capillary, red blood cell, heart, arteries, veins, and ATP. So, let's begin with the muscle that we take for granted as the thing that makes us breathe. Your diaphragm is situated right below your chest wall, or your chest plate, and this is, think of it as a suspension bridge that goes up and down, and it's a big muscle that, like I said, goes up and goes down. And the motion of it going up and down is what causes you to breathe and make those lungs contract and expand. So let's label this the diaphragm real quick. So the next thing we're going to draw in are expanded lungs. Lungs do not move on their own. They require the diaphragm to move, which makes them inflate like a balloon. As the diaphragm moves down, that creates a space in the chest cavity. As that space increases, the lung also expands with it. As it expands and inflates, it pulls in the oxygen from the mouth and the nose and pulls it into the lung. So let's draw that in real quick. This space that it travels. Let's not forget about the nose, a very important part. And then it branches off, one to one lung and the other to the other lung, and both lungs work together to pull in that oxygen. So the lungs expand, oxygen from the outside comes in, and it's kind of spaced out. It gets pulled in, and others follow. It goes down this tube and then goes into the lungs, and it occupies this space inside the lungs, and it creates this high oxygen concentration inside those lungs. Now also inside these lungs are this special branch. It looks like a tree, and we call this an alveoli. So it's really small right here, you can't see it, and I think it's time that we zoom in a bit on this one particular alveoli here. So here's my zoom in box, and there's the alveoli coming in, and like I said, it looks like a weird tree, whatever you want to call it, and let's label it. And what's inside that alveoli are, no, wrong color, is the oxygen that's inside. And also connected to these alveoli are very small blood vessels. These blood vessels are capillaries, super tiny, so tiny that you only have about the space for one blood cell, red blood cell, to fit. And so let's label that my red blood cell. The oxygen moves from the alveoli into the capillary, which is this, and it occupies there's about 4 oxygens per one blood vessel. I'm sorry, blood cell. And then this gets carried out and meets all the other blood cells that have oxygen, and it goes throughout the body. So if you were to draw that, it just kind of extends out and it goes throughout the body. Now, as we talked in a different video about cellular respiration, it's going to come back, or at least the blood vessel will come back with a different form, and this is you're going to exchange the carbon dioxide. And then we'll talk about that in a bit. But let's first talk about the power that's being made to move these blood cells. And the powerful organ that we use to power these is the heart. So here's my awkward looking heart. It's kind of in the center as opposed to the left. And there's 4 chambers. And you can't really see it right here, but there's arteries and veins coming from that heart. So let's zoom in on that heart. Four chambers, super simple for our sake. And let's talk about what we were just mentioning, the oxygen leaving inside the blood vessel, or inside the red blood cell. And so this thing goes out to the body. And this thing that is carrying it with a whole bunch of other things, this is like the highway, this thing is called an artery. This artery goes throughout the body, and then the thing that pulls back, that after cellular respiration happens and we have this carbon dioxide coming back, we have these things called veins that carry the red blood cells. But inside of it now, we have carbon dioxide. Let's label this my vein. And this comes from the body. The lungs, there's some action going on in here. Like I said, the lungs drop off oxygen. So this up here is an artery that comes from the lungs with the blood that has oxygen inside of it. Gets pumped in and pumps out, and same thing happens with the vein. Blood cells come in, and then it gets dropped off, it goes to the lungs. And so let's zoom in over here on what's going on inside the lungs. We're looking at the same alveoli because they all work about the same. Doesn't matter about when or mostly not where, but when this happens. And so let's draw the alveoli again. And we have our capillary. In this case, it has our red blood cells, but instead of oxygen in those red blood cells, we have our carbon dioxide, which then gets dropped off into the capillary. And then it goes into the lung. And then as the diaphragm goes up, it pushes and makes that gap smaller. And then the carbon dioxide leaves through the mouth and the nose, and that's when we exhale. Real quick, let's look at a nicer diagram of this heart. We have this thing here. So, going back with the lungs, oxygen comes in from the air, from your mouth, goes into the lungs with the alveoli. Those lungs then have that diffusion of oxygen into the red blood cells. The red blood cells are being carried through this highway, this artery, from one chamber of the heart, gets pumped through, comes back around to this other artery, goes through a whole bunch of highways, now gets smaller into these capillaries. These capillaries then go into the organs of the body. Cellular respiration happens in the body, and you make this ATP. Millions upon millions of ATP for those cells to do work. Then what happens, you have now carbon dioxide as a waste that comes out of those cells, goes through the capillaries, through the veins, all the way back to the heart, and then it gets pumped and then pumped and pumped back to the lungs, and carbon dioxide exits.